Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Institute of Export and International Trade about the package of customs measures announced by the Chancellor as part of the recent spring budget. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for today. And I'd like to thank you all for joining this afternoon. A really decent audience already. We had over 800 people sign up and already a couple hundred on the line. So clearly an important topic with potentially significant repercussions for UK trade. So we really do hope you find it useful. On the next slide, though, you'll see that we have three fantastic speakers today. Firstly, we have a real stalwart of the programme in Kevin Shakespeare. Kevin is the Director of Strategic Projects and International Development at the Institute and the man in the know on all things customs and trade. So we're really glad Kevin's back with us today. We then have a webinar debutante in Garima Shrivastava, who has recently joined the Institute as a Senior Trade and Customs Specialist. Garima brings with her a great wealth of trade and customs knowledge, having previously worked at LNS, a leading law firm in India, and at EY in its New York Global Trade Advisory Team. And finally, we'll be hearing from Ilona Kavka, the Institute's digital trade specialist, who has worked in various customs compliance teams in Europe and has a great understanding of how to automate and optimize compliance processes. So a great panel of speakers. I hope you agree. On the next slide, though, we're going to run the first of a few polls we'll do today to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we are here asking, how would you describe your understanding of the new customs measures introduced by the Chancellor in the spring budget? And the options range from strong understanding to no understanding at all. While you are answering that poll, some housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window, usually to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today, but please note we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated time. Please also note that if your questions are short and clear, I am more likely to be able to read them. Finally, you will receive a recording of the webinar along with a copy of the slides in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. But I'm just going to quickly close the poll. Thank you everyone for responding. As ever, very glad to get such honest and revealing insight from you all. So I suppose not surprisingly, only 2% of you say strong understanding. That's fair enough. It was only a couple of weeks it was announced. A fifth of you, about that anyway, say quite strong understanding, but the vast majority of you say either a weak understanding, 59%, or there's another fifth of you who have no understanding at all. Now, Kevin, it's relatively new and these measures are at a relatively early stage of their incubation. So is that a surprise at all, that response from the audience there?
Hello and good afternoon. No, it's not probably surprising because the announcements have been fairly recent. Some of the developments leading to this, including a consultation that the Institute held last year, are very much fed into this. So we hope today that we'll help improve the understanding, but we want everyone on the webinar today to be part of this journey. And it's not too dramatic to say that this could really reinvent customs and trade as we know it. Thank you.
Great stuff, Kevin. That's really a strong start as to why this webinar is so important. But on the next slide, without any further ado, it's my delight to hand over to Kevin to begin today's presentation. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, and I hope everyone on the webinar is well. And these are certainly exciting times. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of some of the key customs announcements, but really focus on some of the really key areas. So if we have the next slide, please. So in terms of the spring budget customs package, as we refer to it, there's major announcements on authorisations, simplified customs declaration procedures, around a simplification of customs declarations, announcements on guarantees, transit, and as my colleague Garima will be talking through advanced customs valuation rulings and accreditation of customs brokers. So here we have the next slide, please. So let's start with authorisations, and really some key announcements here. And effectively the announcement that authorisations will now be grouped into 5 areas: AEO, fiscal, simplifications of declarations, transit, ports and wards. And one of the really important aspects here is that traders will be able to make applications for each of these 5 groups, rather than the individual 42 authorisations that existed previously. In the next slide, we're going to look at an example of 2 of these groups. But it's not just about the reduction to 5 parent groups, if you like. It's also about simplifications that will reduce the instances of the traders having to send the same information multiple times for lots of different authorisations, and also the ambition, or also the reality, of introducing a digital portal to process these applications. So some quite dramatic changes in authorisations. If we have the next slide, please. So if we think, and I've just picked 2 of the 5 here, 5 groupings. I'm going to start with fiscal, because some of these might be more familiar to you. So areas like customs warehousing, inward processing, outward processing, duty deferment account. We can see all these under the fiscal or master authorization. So great opportunities here for businesses, traders, to look at their actual strategy around all these fiscal authorizations. No longer do you need to think about it as a separate application for inward processing, outward processing. So you can very much have this integrated import-export supply chain strategy based on it. So great opportunities, but also opportunities to think about other authorizations such as end use and authorized use, for example. Let's quickly look at declarations and simplifications. We're going to talk more about that in a couple of slides time, but also think about the whole process of how we can simplify trade. So there's a number of elements here in the declarations and simplifications, the likes of the BIRD system for bulk imports, entry into declarants records, EIDR. And again, at the Institute, we're very, very keen to work with the whole industry, whether you're a trader, a logistics service provider, an intermediary, and ensuring we maximize the opportunities that are going to arise from these exciting announcements. If we have the next slide, please. So the next slide focuses on simplified customs declaration procedures. For those of you with long, medium, and even short-term memories, you may refer to this as or previously as CFSP. But we were keen at the Institute, and one of the key elements of our consultation response after liaison with the industry was to move the actual supplementary date from the 4th working day to the 10th or the 11th, depending on the import-export side of things. But let's take a step back and look at the benefits of simplified customs declaration procedures. One of the core benefits is the faster, the expedited clearance of imported goods, so that we can get these goods quickly to the end destination. So we still have that benefit, but we also have now the further cash flow benefit of the 10th, 11th working day of the month, and also the concept or the wider use of potential aggregation. So if we think of an example here on the right-hand side of the slide, data can be combined on supplementary declarations if each item has the same supplier, recipient, and commodity code. So clearly that facilitates less supplementary declarations. And an example where that can be useful is if you're removing goods from a customs warehouse which has identical data. So we're seeing this as a great opportunity for the industry to think how they use trade, to take advantage of expedited import clearance and have the cash flow and the aggregation benefits as well. So some really, really key benefits that we consider could very much apply in the future as well. So if we move on now to the next slide. Thank you. So simplification of customs declarations. Obviously, there'll be announcements coming on the target operating model, which we hope will be shortly. And this links in very well here with the opportunity to look at the whole process and the requirements of customs declarations. And this could be quite exciting and innovative as well. So the review will cover import and export declarations, but it could link in with concepts like trusted trader, target operating model, ecosystem of trust as well. But I'm also quite excited by a specific focus on export declarations. How can we help our businesses export more, our traders? And also the SME piece as well. So how can we help small and less experienced UK businesses? So that is also key to the future of trade. So we will obviously be consulting with our members and our whole network, and we'd very much encourage you to link in with us as well, because we think we can be quite exciting and innovative here in the future simplification of customs declarations. If we have a next slide, please. So customs guarantees. So in January 2021, His Majesty's government removed guarantees for most traders with authorisations, and that was helpful. But potentially now there's an opportunity to go further, whereas whereby guarantees is really only a default option. So again, we will be consulting and working with you and the entire industry here to look at how further we can go on customs guarantees. So an example would be on duty deferment. Currently, there's a threshold of £10,000. Now, that if you're over £10,000, then you have to have a number of checks on compliance and solvency, which can be quite detailed. So, and a question we will be posing is, should the current £10,000 threshold be raised in the case of duty deferment? As always, we must say you must demonstrate compliance. We've said this before, I've said this before, the future is around demonstrating compliance, not waiting for you to be audited or checked, to demonstrate compliance up front. If we have the next slide, please. So as we sort of come towards the end, I'm just going to focus on transit towards the end. And clearly a key emphasis here in growing the number of transit movers that start and end away from the border. So transit in some circumstances can be really, really important. It's important in the context of GB to EU movements, important in the context of EU to movements to Ireland through the GB land bridge, for example. So really, really important here that we encourage use of transit, and also some of the initiatives which the Institute have advised also on NCTS 5 and the more digital elements of transit will become really, really important. And also you'll note from the slide this concept that guarantee waivers become the default as opposed to a requirement going forward. So one of the potential barriers to use of transit around guarantee waivers can hopefully be simplified. If we have the next slide, please. So some of the thinking and proposals being developed here is to make it easier for authorised consignors to start a movement to the client's premises. So that's again a really important aspect, but simplifying the aspects of transit. But let's come to inbound movements and focus on that. So if we have the next slide, please. So effectively modernising the unloading process for authorised consignees, but then clarifying how to end a transit movement when loading goods on ships, trains and planes that are destined for their stores. So what we would encourage, the Institute is on the task and finish group for transit, that's looking at transit, great opportunity. So any feedback and comments, again, where you would like to contribute to the future of transit, we're seeing some quite exciting opportunities here to increase use of transit, but the benefits that transit gives. So please look out for developments. So finally, in summary, just a quick overview here. We feel this is a great opportunity to modernise trade, not just modernise authorisations, but modernise trade as a whole. And with some of the exciting announcements around the ecosystem of trust, the single trade window, potentially the target operating model, which we will keep the whole community updated with, we can very much link in these opportunities. But what the process has to be is co-design, co-development with industry, and we're committed to that, committed to this open market approach of co-design and not an approach of imposing solutions. So again, please work with us, and I'll pass back now to William. Thank you.
Many thanks, Kevin. A really important point at the end there as well about the opportunity to modernise trade. Really interesting times for sure. As you can see, we're going to run our second poll, and then I'll ask Kevin a couple of questions which you've been sending in already. But the first poll is based on what you've heard so far. How do you think, how likely do you think you are that you'll be using these authorisations in the future? So Kevin, while people are answering that poll, we've already had a few decent questions come in from the audience, but one I'd like to put to you myself is regarding the phrase demonstrating compliance in trade. And I've heard you say things like compliant trade more generally, but also legitimate trade before in other webinars and elsewhere. So what do you mean when you say compliant or legitimate trade?
Yeah, it's a good question, because sometimes it can mean different things excuse me, to different people. So there are some basics that businesses should always follow, and again, we've covered these before. Make sure you have a full proof of export, proof of import file, not just for proof of export for zero rating of VAT, but you have this, but partly for that, but also a complete record. So complete records, including evidence of the customs declaration clearly as well. So make sure you have a complete file with all the documents from the commercial invoice, pro forma invoice, transport documents, and so on. So that's one aspect, but also make sure you have full details. So how are you classifying the goods for the commodity code? Are you clear there of the configuration? Make sure you have the likes of supplier declarations for evidence in origin of the goods, and make sure you're using the correct customs valuation, evaluating the goods for customs, which we will talk about shortly. So full trade compliance from end to end. I'm sure we're probably going to get a few questions on AEO and trusted trader today, but as a bare minimum, cover those things that I've mentioned today, but also more. Full documentation, full evidence, full transparency will give you benefits moving forward as we move in this exciting world of trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That's hopefully been useful for the audience. It's very useful for me. I'm just going to share the results of that poll. This isn't too surprising, I think, given it is still early stages and a lot of these authorisations are going for consultation between government and industry, as Kevin noted. But over half of you aren't sure yet. 38% of you say yes, you are more likely to use these authorisations. Only 8% of you saying no. I guess the poll question doesn't quite gather the fact that maybe some of you are already using some of these authorisations. But thank you everyone for responding to that. I just want to do one quick question which has come in from Bobby, Kevin, and Bobby asks, will these new measures support the changes being made via the Windsor framework for trade between Britain and Northern Ireland?
I think the first thing to say there is that we want all traders to benefit, the whole industry to benefit, logistics providers and so on from this future of trade. So that will include businesses in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. So that's the first thing to say. With regard to GBNI trade, it's fair to say that in addition to the businesses benefiting from trade with Europe and the rest of the world, there are some potentials there to actually simplify elements. So we'd like to think, as you say, that we'll have this exciting future. So GBNI trade, whether you're a trader in any of the United Kingdom, you can benefit from the future of improved access to authorisation, simplifications, duty deferment, but also exports as well. So in short, we'd like to think it will help, and we will do our best to make sure that the trade, wherever you're trading, will be simplified, and you will trade as positively as is possible. Thank you.
And of course, as part of that, we'll continue to post updates about these measures in general, but also the Windsor framework through our daily bulletin and hopefully some future webinars at some point as well. But I'd like to say thank you to Kevin. We'll hopefully be hearing more from him again towards the end of the webinar. But now it's my delight on the next slide to hand over to our next speaker in Garima Shrivastava, who's going to be talking about two key parts of the Chancellor's package, one being Advanced Customs Valuation Rulings and the other being the proposed Customs Intermediaries Code. So over to you, Garima.
Thanks, Will. Um, Right. So before we delve into the introduction of voluntary standards by the UK government, it is important also to understand what exactly are customs intermediaries. So customs intermediaries are brokers or representatives or agents that act between traders and customs and help with customs clearance processes. While brokers do support traders by providing all sort of necessary documentation and undertake customs formalities such as clearances, they also hold responsibility to maintain government interests by ensuring compliance and the collection of appropriate duties. Now, the WCO revised Kyoto Convention obligates countries to make the use of customs brokers optional and not mandatory. And the same thing is said by the World Trade Organization's Trade Facilitation Agreement. However, mandatory use of licensed brokers is still prevalent in many parts of the world, such as Americas or Caribbean region or in some African countries. When it comes to obligations and rights while performing several activities on behalf of traders, these licensed customs brokers have to meet several obligations and liabilities depending on the national legislations and regulations of the country in which they're licensed. And licensing requirements, too, just like liabilities and interests, and rights may vary depending on which country the customs brokers operate in. So it's heavily dependent on national legislation and domestic needs. Now, licensing requirements typically include a combination of various factors such as sound knowledge of customs laws, minimum educational qualification, work experience, in some cases, written examinations too, and even a minimum number of hours of training in customs laws. Now, next slide, please. Right. So this is WCO's study on customs brokers, and it has covered about 99 administrations. Out of 99 reporting administrations, 95 stated that the country has some mechanism for customs brokers or intermediaries. However, there were 4 countries that did not actually have a legal requirement or a framework for customs brokers. So we only covering 95 here in the diagram. So 72 stated that the use of customs brokers was optional and not mandatory. And then 9 reported it to be mandatory. And then 14 administrations said that use of customs brokers was only mandatory in some specified categories. Typically, these specified categories could be based on threshold values or the nature of goods, such as household goods or used cars or non-commercial samples or postal items, etc. Next slide, please. So the feedback from traders through HMRC's recent call for evidence suggested that quality of customs intermediaries varies across the market and varies across different levels. And you see issues such as lack of knowledge and training, cost, uncertainty over rules and standards, and then accountability cropped up. And there was also a demand to consider licensing and regulation of intermediary sector, similar to countries like the US or Netherlands, Australia. So the UK government has said that it will run a 3-month consultation in the summer on introducing a voluntary standard for a customs intermediary. And good thing is that they will also consult stakeholders on introduction of a voluntary standard and understand their concerns and understand how to operate such kind of a customs intermediary model. So the UK government aims at eliminating varying levels of service quality and also looks to improve the service of customs intermediaries. So now we'll move to the next part of my presentation today, which is advanced valuation ruling. Before we get into advanced valuation ruling, it is important to understand what advanced ruling is. So an advanced ruling is a written decision in the form of a letter issued by a customs authority that tells the importer how the customs will treat a good in advance. So, as the name suggests, it has to be prospective and it represents the customs position on a particular transaction, which is legally binding on the parties for a specified period or until revoked. Now, currently, these prospective rulings have been seen to be in different kinds of areas of customs, such as classification, origin, and valuation. But then we have to understand that only certain countries have the mechanism for valuation ruling in all the three aspects of customs. Now, why are these advanced valuation rulings talked about? Why are they so important? Um, because they are prospective in nature. They add certainty and predictability to international trade, and they help traders make informed business decisions because they know how the customs administration is going to treat the import of a particular good in a particular kind of transaction. This is also helpful to customs administrations because they have advanced knowledge of future importations and future import transactions and can use this kind of information for risk management purposes. Next slide, please. Right. So now the UK government has announced as part of its spring budget that advanced valuation rulings will become a part of the UK customs regime. And to allow for this kind of introduction of advanced valuation ruling mechanism, there will have to be an amendment to UK legislative framework for customs. Now, this has been done for the UK to be able to meet the requirement of new free trade agreements, which typically contain clauses on advanced valuation rulings, and also to support UK's accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, because the members of this agreement, most of the members of this agreement have this kind of mechanism of advanced valuation rulings. Now, why an amendment is needed to the legislative framework is because currently the Taxation Cross-Border Trade Act 2018 contains provisions only on advanced tariff classification and advanced origin rulings. Now, there will be an amendment to add a provision for advanced valuation rulings. And this mechanism will enable legally binding rulings on customs valuation methodology for a specific good in a particular scenario for a period of 3 years. It is to be noted that the customs authority will not provide for the exact value, but will guide the importer on what should be the correct method to arrive at the correct value. And currently, we know that the AVR notice will include information such as cases in which rulings need not be given, about the procedure on making applications, and then time limits, which are very critical for decision making. You don't want to wait endlessly as an importer, and then disclosure requirements because valuation as a subject entails loads of documentation and information from exporters and importers. So disclosure requirements are also very critical. But then these two significant changes are definitely welcome moves by the UK government, and we as as an organization that works for importers and exporters would be happy to help with any sort of applications or preparations for advanced valuation rulings. And we see that even for customs brokers, voluntary standards, I believe that IOEs will be very helpful in terms of certification and trainings and, development and capacity building. So I think we can move forward. Yeah, we have a poll question.
Great, thank you, Garima. That's a great presentation. So really informative, and they both look like really interesting initiatives there, particularly the advanced valuation rulings. I hadn't realised they weren't already in actually. So that seems like a very good thing for government to be introducing. And as Garima says, we look forward to working with businesses online and elsewhere to help government in introducing these initiatives. We're going to run our next poll very quickly, and just on the voluntary standards, I suppose. And this is a really interesting one. So should a training course be introduced for accreditation as a customs intermediary? So I'll give you a couple of moments to answer that poll. And as you do so, Garima, we're getting some great questions in from the audience. The one I'm going to begin with is one from Poppy. Interesting, I think our last questions were from Bobby. So we've had a Poppy and a Bobby today. And Poppy asks, can you give me an example of a situation in which I could apply for an advanced customs valuation ruling?
Right, that's a very good question. Of course, advanced rulings have to be applied for in advance, so it'll be a prospective ruling. Typically, I see that most complicated transactions, import transactions, will call for an application to get an advanced ruling, such as any sort of additional payments that comes with the good. For example, a royalty payment or marketing expenses payments, where there could be a question or a doubt regarding treatment or addition of those kinds of payments to the value. It is going to be relevant for importers to just seek a feedback from customs and get a written binding ruling saying that this sort of payments should be included, so that you know how these payments would be treated in the future. So these kinds of complex transactions, which typically lead to doubts and confusions, would definitely make a good case for advanced ruling applications in terms of valuation.
And just to clarify, a question from Joanna, I mean, these are optional on behalf of a trader to apply for one, aren't they? They're not compulsory in any situation.
Sorry, could you go again? I couldn't hear you properly.
So Joanna was asking, are these optional or compulsory? But from what you're saying, a trader has to apply for them, so they would be an optional thing on behalf of the trader.
Yeah, definitely. This is optional. It's not mandatory. The importer can choose to apply, and then it is always recommended to apply in such complex transactions, even though it's not mandatory.
Terrific. And one more question from Matilda, who asks, can you provide me with an example of what a broker or intermediary may require to be compliant in a country which has already got an existing accreditation scheme?
I think the US model has proved to be extremely effective. So they have a system of what they call an examination. This is customs brokers license examination. So any person in the industry who wants to be a customs broker has to clear that examination and then pay an application fee and then make an application and then get an approval from the Customs and Border Protection, which is the CBP. So CBP is the licensing authority in that case. And then there are other factors that the applicant has to be eligible on. For example, the applicant has to have a specific kind of knowledge and has to be over 21 years and then shouldn't be an employee of the federal government. So these are just the basic eligibility requirements. And then the most important thing is the examination, which leads to licensing. And the other thing that is to be kept in mind is that there's a government issuing authority, which I think would be very relevant when considering voluntary standards in the UK too.
Thank you. And to that point, really interesting response from the audience. So quite emphatic, if anything. So 92% of you say yes, some form of training should be introduced for accrediting intermediaries or brokers, and 8% of you saying no. So I think that really potentially speaks to the success of what happens in the US, Garima, as potentially a model for the UK. Is that poll what you would have been expecting?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think regulation of customs intermediary is something that is needed, and that is the only way to tackle with the varying levels of services across the industry.
Terrific. Well, conscious of time, so I'm going to move on from this part of the webinar. But thank you, Garima. That was a terrific first presentation with us, and we look forward to hopefully hearing from you in the Q&A later on. But now it's my delight to hand over to our final speaker today on the next slide, Ilona Kafka, who's going to be talking about how all of this relates to the other ongoing work in government around digitalising trade procedures and processes. So over to you, Ilona.
Thank you, Will. I would like to go through the most active right now digital initiatives that we have in UK. And we'll start with explaining what digitalization of trade is. Although there is no single definition of digital trade, we can see the growing importance of digitally enabled trade of both goods and services. The digitalization of trade increases the speed and scale of trade and enables companies to use innovative tools to reach more customers, making this outreach possible globally. Digitalization of trade also changes the way goods are traded, allows e-commerce to grow, which we can see expanding with unprecedented speed since pandemic. Digitalization also influences the way goods are produced and supplied, and more digitalization means more trade. As in many other benefits, it also reduces the costs for the supply chains, for example, by enabling cross-border data flows and digitalized trade processes. Next slide, please. Smart borders envision safer, more standardized and cost-effective borders. It can be seen as an ecosystem for shared decision-making and real-time collaboration that empowers government and the industry to work together to create safer, more standardized and cost-effective movements of goods and people. Smart borders mean also seamless trade through borders that keep the citizens safe. UK government has defined the vision for the smart borders within its 2025 border strategy, and it aims to create the most effective border in the world. It is delivered by 6 transformations proposed for movement of both goods and people. I will talk in more detail about a few elements mentioned within the vision around movements of the goods as we progress. Next slide, please. First, I would like us to look at the long-term vision for using data within border strategy model. As we can see on the slide, there is a focus on supplying the data to the government once by the traders, but also in some instances receiving supply chain data in advance. The submission point is the single trade window, which centralizes the input, but also allows the data sharing further with the other governmental agencies as required. And this allows the government to perform all the risking and assess the hazards to the safety and security of the borders, and of course the citizens. We can see that the focus is on single trade window. So let's have a closer look on what single trade window is and what it envisions to do. Next slide, please. At this point, there are multiple systems involved in moving goods across the UK border. Traders and intermediaries are required to submit data to each system, with multiple data elements being duplication, and that creates additional complexity, admin work, and costs for the border users. A UK single trade window will provide a single data portal in which traders and intermediaries can submit data onto the government. The ambition of the government is to have first part of single trade window, which will allow submission of import declarations and safety and security declarations in November this year. It will allow using the pre-population of data and multi-filing. In a long-term vision, single trade window should allow including use of supply chain data and interoperability. So for example, an export declaration created in single trade window in UK, when single window is interoperable with import country, the data used for submission of export declaration could be a draft of import declaration in a single window of the importing country. This will reduce the errors in data submission and also reduce the imported data. We can also envision the single trade window as an enable for other digital initiatives, as this is where all the data meets and is being delivered to parties who can and should see it. Next slide, please. Target operating model that should be published soon will set out the new regime of border controls and will define how we want to create a seamless new digital border so it deliver our smart borders. It is really promising, and it is said that the new model will harness new technologies, make best use of real-time data, and better target the risks to reduce frictions and costs for businesses and consumers, and create a radically simpler yet secure experience for traders moving goods, such as plants and plant products, across the UK border. Target operating model will ensure that biosecurity of the borders is kept while embracing the technologies. Next slide, please. Ecosystem of Trust pilots are projects that allow collaboration between public and private sectors, between importing and exporting countries, and between new technologies utilized by actors in supply chain, such as Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, distributed ledger technology, or smart contracts and blockchain. It aims to catalyze innovation adoption while ensuring the policy and appropriate standards are set in place. Ecosystem of trust is not only based on technology, but as the name suggests, on trust between the industry and the government. It builds the trust and empowers it through the utilization of innovation, and it allows to leverage the complexities of the goods movements and reduces the controls that are required. It moves them away from the border, and that allows for commercial benefits to compliant traders, and also reduces the stress on the government representatives who work at the border and have to do the controls. So although there is no straight connection between the sprint budget and the initiatives that I have just presented, I hope that I helped the attendees to comprehend how they all connect together and how the technology is the enabler for all the initiatives that have been presented previously. The government has run multiple consultations with stakeholders, and we can ensure that they are doing their best to bring it all together so it puzzles and we have our smart borders. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Ilona. That was a really great overview there. There really is an awful lot going on at the moment, and plenty of potentially really exciting developments for traders to keep abreast of over the coming weeks and months. So thank you for that presentation. Before we go into the Q&A, we're going to ask our final poll. This one's referring back to what Garima was presenting on earlier, asking, would it be better for advanced valuation rulings to be valid until revoked, instead of there being a 3-year limit to reduce the burden of reapplication? So I'll leave that poll open for a few moments. But the first question, I think it makes sense to ask one to Ilona to begin with. This is one which has come from Max. Max asks, are the single trade window, ecosystem of trust, and modernizing authorisations interrelated, or should we as a trader consider these different things to be completely separate?
I think that we should consider all the government initiatives as something that comes together to be delivered for better, safe borders. And as we see, authorisations are bringing the ease when it comes to application. They're grouped, so it will be easier for traders to apply. But we still need a facility to apply for those authorisations. So I believe that single trade window could be the perfect solution for that. And this is where we could submit for our authorization, and then the data could be reused to apply for further authorizations, and it would be stored there. Hence, we wouldn't have to duplicate the data input. but also we could verify whether our authorizations are up to date and do any changes and communicate with the government directly from the portal. So we would be able to view everything there and submit the data once, and also communicate with the government whether our applications is successful, whether we have to submit additional information or get any guidance.
Thank you, Elena. I just want to bring in Kevin there as well. I mean, it sounds a single window as that sort of potential portal in which all of these different authorisations can be simplified in terms of how to apply for them and the cross-fertilisation of data. It all sounds really interesting, and I was just wondering if you could update at all on kind of where things are with this kind of broader project of digitalisation. When do you think traders will start to see these things start to move?
Yeah, I think obviously things will come in stages, but we'd like to think that some of the initiatives that the Institute's been involved with, such as Ecosystem of Trust, that we really are developing proof of concept here. And so, for example, we've had live movements of tea, coffee, cut flowers from Kenya. We've had movements of the likes of fish fingers and fish-based products from the European Union, and also movements of pet food from the likes of Flanders as well. So we like to think that we really want to start seeing the benefits. And we also feel we're speaking on behalf of the industry that compliant traders and traders that are able, in the case of Ecosystem of Trust, to provide advanced supply chain data should definitely benefit from that, and providing that additional visibility almost on top of what is available today. Certainly, I agree that the single trade window presents a fantastic opportunity, not just to introduce the single trade window, but also to really link it in, and I'm sure it is, with these benefits. We've talked around modernising authorisations, we've talked around transit today as examples. So the single trade window can be the conduit, but again, for single trade window to work, it has to be very much an open market, and the market has to evolve and benefit, rather than any solution being imposed on the industry. So we're passionate that a single trade window can really work and really work well if we all work together and we co-design. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Kevin and Elena. Really exciting times, and as ever, we'll keep you posted with further news and developments on all of that. I'm just going to close the poll and share the results. So again, this is, it's early days, but over half of you will need more information before you can answer definitively on this question about advanced valuation rulings. But for a third of you, 35%, think they should be valid until revoked, and 13% of you don't think that, and assuming that means you would be fine with the 3-year limit. So really interesting response. Thank you everyone for responding. So on the next slide, you'll hopefully see that we are now in the Q&A part of the webinar. So I invite all of our speakers to bring back their webcams. Just in reference to Aaron's questions just come through, yes, we will be sending a copy of the slides to all the registrants to today's webinar, along with a copy, along with a link to the recording, which we'll be posting onto our YouTube shortly. So first question, and I'll bring back Garima. It's one from Terry, who asks, how will businesses go about applying for an advanced valuation ruling? Will it be similar as the process for advanced tariff rulings?
I think as far as the process is concerned, definitely it'll be the same thing, a prospective ruling. So it'll have to be applied in advance. And I think the HMRC is going to come up with the detailed procedure. So it'll be similar, but different in the sense that here the customs will not provide the clear answer as to what it should be, but guide in terms of how the customs valuation methods can be applied and what the correct method of valuation in this case would be. So I think keeping that in mind, there would be requirements to submit documents and information. So in that sense, it might be different from applications for advanced rulings in case of tariff classifications or rules of origin, but because in those cases the information might be limited, but here this will need a detailed dig into the operations and financial information of the importing company.
Thank you. I hope that was useful, Terry. A question in from Lorraine. I think I'll put this to Ilona. Lorraine asks, do we need to gather export declaration evidence if we were a trusted trader?
I do believe so. This is for compliance purposes. The trusted trader means that the government trusts us to the level where they allow us to provide less information to the government at the point of importation, which reduces the friction at the border. But we as a compliant trader should keep the records of our transactions, ideally in the future in a digital form, so that we do not produce the paper that we have to store, but I believe we have to still collect all the documentation for our importations for design for dedicated amount of years that is required.
Thank you. I hope that's helpful, Lorraine. I'm going to rattle through a few questions. We are getting some really good questions coming through. Vivi asks, would the Customs Academy serve the purpose of accreditation for customs intermediaries? Kevin, you're very close to this project, so I think I'll put that to you first, and then maybe bring the others. But Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And as the Dean of the UK Customs Academy, I probably would have some views on this one, obviously. So I think what's important, and if you look at other countries for both mandatory and even to some extent for voluntary schemes, the training is really important. So I think therefore. Clearly, we would be bound to say at the Institute of being heavily involved in the UK Customs Academy with over 9,000 learners, that there is a lot of content and information there as well. So it is definitely one option, and I think it's very important to really recognise the importance of training. But not just initial training, but ongoing CPD as well. So if you look at schemes in other countries, there's that ongoing element of CPD. And clearly, we would feel at the Institute and also our involvement with the Customs Academy that we're in a good position for both all the existing information. We had to go through a huge amount of changes to Customs Academy at the time of EU exit. That this exciting future of trade is recognised as well, but not just recognised from the point of view of learning, but recognised from the point of view of implementation, so that all businesses, all actors in the supply chain can benefit irrespective of size.
Thank you, Kevin. And I just wonder, I mean, Garima, you mentioned the US earlier, and I know you've obviously done a lot of work in India and other countries too. I mean, what sort of things have you seen overseas which maybe the UK could learn from, kind of aside from the US?
So I think in most of the countries that we've been talking about, US, Netherlands, Australia, everywhere, there is a system of regulation of licensing for customs intermediaries, which definitely is something that UK should consider because there's been distortions and lack of accountability, and you don't know who you're hiring as a customs intermediary because you don't know what kind of training that person has, what kind of experience that person has. So there has to be some sort of regulation, which I think can be assessed on the basis of an examination. And I highly recommend that there should be training courses and different sort of capacity building activities for applicants who do want to take this examination, so that they are well prepared before they can take this examination and they're able to obtain such licensing. And I think this sort of regulation will also bring about accountability and similar liability, if I don't say same liability, but some sort of liability and responsibility in this sector. And I look forward to it.
Thank you, Garima. I mean, I'm sure the industry will do as well. It's I think accountability and responsibility are always good things to adhere to. Kevin, you had a good question from a regular listener to the programme in Dale. Dale's noted by listening to recent government training sessions on customs, the role of AEO was surprisingly played down as something more relevant for larger companies. But what is the future of AEO, especially for SMEs, and would it gain wider advantage than it has in recent years? And Dale adds that he would like to see AEO status in terms of AEO status gain more of a significant advantage so that more exporters would value their compliance processes. So yeah, what's the future for AEO within all of this exciting medley of stuff?
Thank you, Dale. It's a really good question. So I think first of all, it's probably fair to say that at a global level, not just a UK level, the benefits of AEO, authorised economic operator, haven't really been as envisaged. And there's still an opportunity globally as well, whether that's within AEO mutual recognition agreements. And we also have to consider AEO as both the C, the customs simplification, and the S, the safety and security. I probably agree that there's more that can be done in AEO in the UK and globally as well. It's really important that the AEO is promoted, but AEO has a key role. Clearly, it's one of the 5 authorisation groupings. With regard to the SME side, again, I think it's important that SMEs are really able to access and benefit from this exciting world, and it's harder for SMEs, clearly. So we at the Institute are passionate about supporting SMEs, and I know there's been talk of a single trade window for exports. So we are passionate about supporting SMEs and exporters, but also not just supporting SMEs at an affordable price. So they're not priced out of getting authorisations, they're not priced out of applying for AEO. We feel that there's an awful lot we can do here, and I think our consultations, our work in the task and finish groups, with the feedback of our network and our membership is absolutely key. So great question, and there's a lot we can do together here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. I hope that was a useful answer. I'm sure it was. We're getting loads of questions through. We'll probably have to handle some of these offline, but some really great stuff coming through. So thank you everyone for sending those in. We'll probably do one last question, and it comes from Sachin. I think it's probably to Elena first. And Sachin asks, what advanced supply chain information will traders need to provide and in what format? And I just wonder, actually, as part of this answer, if you could say just a little bit more, maybe after the initial answer, just a little bit more about the ecosystem of trust as well. That sounded really exciting in terms of the opportunities there. So Elena, first to you about the advanced supply chain information which traders need to provide, and then maybe a little bit about ecosystem of trust as well.
Advanced supply chain information would be all the information that you, as a trader, provide to the government at the later stage, but the government has a visibility on it prior it is submitted. So they're able to do all the risking in advance, and again move this compliance checks from the border, which can get clogged because of the amount of goods being shipped, and they know about the goods being imported sometimes a week or 2 in advance. So they have the overview and the visibility, and they can dedicate appropriate amount of employees to the specific port or inland entry to UK or airport entry to the UK. And it helps to de-escalate all the delays, and it brings savings to the traders because the goods are not being stuck at the border. So all the data that we provide, I don't expect any other data that would not be relevant for the safety and security of the borders in the UK to be requested, to be submitted. When it comes to ecosystems of trust, this is harnessing the technology, the modern technologies, to also do the biohazard checks and make sure that the goods that are being imported are safe and secure to be brought to the country. We are using technologies such as blockchain, Internet of Things, smart seals to control the status of the goods or the containers. We can control humidity inside the containers. We can know whether the goods have been tampered with, and the goods are moving smoothly. whether let's say the smart seal, if it has been broken, the information is being sent to the customs authorities, and they know that they have to address that, and that the specific container should be inspected with a priority, because something could have happened there. And the traders have the trust, so they're able to ship their goods without any disruptions if all the technology provide information, the documents in a paperless form are being submitted, and the goods are being delivered, and the government also has less checks to do in the progress.
Excellent. It's really fascinating, the ecosystem of trust stuff. We've done some articles on the website, which we definitely recommend people to read for more information. But yeah, thank you, Elena, for answering those two questions there and for linking them together as well. We've hit the witching hour, so we're going to have to start wrapping up now. But thank you, Kevin, Garima, and Elena, for answering all of your questions, and thank you, audience, for sending so many really insightful and interesting questions as well. So I hope everyone has found that useful. On the next slide, a reminder that we will be sending the recording of today's webinar with a copy of the slides in the follow-up email, which you should get in the next 24 hours or so. Please get in touch if for any reason this email doesn't come through to your main inbox. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, but we actually are now going to have a short break for Easter on the webinar front. But we will be doing shortly announcing a few webinars for after Easter in April and May, including sessions on the UK's post-Brexit trade agreements, sustainable trade and ESG reporting, and maybe just maybe, a webinar on the much anticipated target operating model as and when that is published. You can go to export.org.uk for more information about our upcoming webinars and activities, including how to join as a member of the Institute and the educational and consultancy services we provide to businesses and individuals looking to thrive in international trade. But thank you everyone for joining us today. As you leave, please let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions for topics in future events by completing the short exit survey. But for now, bye-bye.